Oh, I've gone 5 minutes. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. Thank you. So that's y'all's job from now on. It's just for 100 points. Remind me, not really, but someone remind me about the recording. God. All right. So discipline and punishment, two different things. When you become the school leader, when you become that person, it's important that that is something that you entwine in the culture of your school, that this school is not about punishment, that this school, and that's a part of the PBIS model, this school is really about discipline. And no matter what, every statistic, everything that I've seen, and probably your school too, when you look at the teacher working condition survey, your advanced ed survey, somewhere along the line, someone is going to tell you that discipline is a problem, a huge problem at your school. Now, it may be a parent, or it may be the classroom teachers who may say that. And if you haven't experienced it already, you will. But when you look at the national research on discipline, it is clear that most parents do consider schools and discipline to be a huge thing. So when you become that school leader, you are going to be hit with this first day in the office, no doubt about it. So discipline versus punishment. The important thing about discipline is that it's about relationships, and it is about the relationships at the end of the discipline. They are restored and perhaps increased in as far as the relationship. Punishment itself is just pure and simple, gotcha, here's what we have to do moving forward. So the positive conclusion is the difference between what punishment and discipline is. Punishment, as I said, it really focuses on what you did. I gotcha. Here's your punishment. Take it. Here, cause and effect. You did this, therefore this is what's going to happen. It focuses on misdeeds, and it does not in any way focus on what did you learn, what can you do differently. So that's punishment. And oftentimes in a school, that's what the assistant principal or the principal feels like they have to do. Now, there are student code of conduct. Students are expected to behave in school, and as a principal or assistant principal, you are expected to enforce the rules. But how you do that between discipline and punishment really makes a difference, hopefully, in the school. When you look at discipline is all about what can be done to help with future deeds. So what really can be done to help the student grow from the experience and to become a positive experience for them. So the positive conclusion turns out otherwise with the discipline, and it is probably in the child's best interest, or it is in the child's best interest as well. So, and it is also not a time for interrogation. There are three basic questions and statements that you try to get from positive discipline. The first one is, of course, what did you do wrong? And in this under PBIS and other systems, this is an opportunity for the child to really own up and take responsibility for being a part of the problem. And hopefully, at that, you can also see some sort of sorrow or some sort of ownership of it, which also gives them the understanding or empathy with what's going on, what happened to the other who may be involved in that discipline, in that discipline. So it's really not about what everyone else was doing. It's really about the ownership that one particular child may have. And this is the relationship piece. This is what I did. This is my role in it. And as an administrator, as an assistant principal, that's one of the first things you're going to get is, well, I did it because Steve hit me, or Steve did this, Steve did that. It really doesn't matter. It's really about what your role in that particular discipline was. So that's a common mistake, is that we allow kids to move ahead of us and to try to blame it on others or say others did this, and to have dialogue about others. When the real question is, what did you do wrong? What did you? So you can own it. The second part of constructive discipline or discipline is asking them, what was that? Why was that wrong? Again, this is in itself giving the child the opportunity to own it, and it gets really to the heart of the issues directly. So it gives you also a possibility for opportunities for growth. Because when you were talking to that child as an assistant principal and they began to describe why it was wrong, you began to see a little bit of their understanding of the situation. It also gives you their understanding of what they did wrong, and what oftentimes it will lead to what they can do differently to make it better. So The third question that you ask under constructive discipline is, what are you going to do differently next time? This gives kids an opportunity also to own the next actions so that they can grow from it. And of course, you always end with an affirmation that this is what we do different, and a promise that they'll be moving differently. So in the workplace, as you become the leader and you start looking for ways in which to interact with your staff, and we're moving now from the student perspective, because as an assistant principal and administrator, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to work with discipline in your student side, but discipline on the professional side. The positive behaviors in the workplace, this is what you need to do. These are the kinds of opportunities that you'll need to take with your staff. Again, I can assure you, year one or month one, maybe week one of your internship or your time into an administrative position, you are going to have to deal with something in the workplace. So some of the things that are encouraged as positive discipline in the workplace, of course, is to encourage employee participation in appropriate behaviors. You're going to have your first week of school, you're going to have that teacher who always comes to school late, who always leaves early, who always leaves the kids unattended on the playground. All of these things will become second place to you, and you will learn very quickly who they are. And they have to be disciplined because you are trying to encourage appropriate behaviors that are not only appropriate for their role as teacher or teacher assistant, but is appropriate for those children who are under their watch. Because in North Carolina, as it is in South Carolina, as a classroom teacher, you have a duty to protect and to make sure your kids are safe. So as an administrator, you have a duty to make sure that those teachers are doing those things. So you will at some point have a chance or an opportunity to do some discipline in the workplace. It is very important that you try to use, when we talked about situational leaderships and we talked about what kind of leadership style you're going from based on relationships and their competencies, well, this is the next step. Positive reinforcement. You know, you got to make sure your staff are very much understanding. And I know at your first staff meeting at the beginning of the year, you probably go over the handbook, you probably go over the rules, the expectations for the staff. But there are ways in which you can make positive reinforcements to your staff. I mean, obviously, there are some that cost money. There are many of them that do not. But that's one of the ways in which you enforce discipline in the workplace. Negative discipline, it's going to happen. You got to have, again, the same approach of asking the same 3 questions with your staff as you would with students. You don't want to go into a conference thinking that it's all about termination. That's really not the way in any kind of problem, no matter what the discipline from the staff member might be. But negative discipline should be your last resort. It should be something that you do to try to save that employer before you move to the next step with the central office about termination or employment issues. You should reinforce the goals of the organization to make sure that they have bought into the goals, that they understand the goals, that they understand their role in it, and they also understand that their part in this particular organization and this culture of this organization is important, because if they drop the ball, then someone else has got to pick up that ball in the organization, and that slows down and moves the organization away from its goals and away from what the organization should be trying to accomplish. It's important to have a process in place. When you become that school administrator and you have to discipline, it's important that you document. It's important that you make sure that the staff member has documentation as well, that if you put something in the file that they're well aware of it, they have an opportunity to respond to it. By all means, make sure you know what the due process rights of your district might be and that you follow those, because many court cases have circled around, have evolved around, not that the teacher did something wrong. They've been thrown out because the administrator did something wrong. You didn't follow your own policies and procedures. So it's very important to have those processes and to follow those, and to make sure that teachers are well aware of it and that you're not violating. And always give feedback. There's always importance to make sure your staff have feedback. Feedback could be something simple as walking down the hall and sticking your head in, and after 5 minutes, you know, putting a little sticky note in their mailbox telling them what a great job they did. So always have that positive feedback, ways in which they can improve. Now the other, probably the next part of this is a big part, and that's PBIS. You all are all familiar with PBIS. because it's utilized in North Carolina, South Carolina, across the nation. They actually have a whole network and support and resources, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. But PBIS has probably been on the scene now for a number of years. I know we started in Caldwell County, which is where I was superintendent of. We started training in PBIS probably about 5 years ago and moving toward it as a complete goal for all of our schools. And it is based upon that principle of constructive discipline. It's based on not punishment, but constructive discipline and prevention. It's about positive behaviors that you look for ways in which you encourage positive behavior. So it's really very much front-ended, so you don't have to deal with a lot of discipline. So in PBIS, kids learn about the behavior. They learn just as they would any other subject in that school. And it is about prevention and certainly not punishment. Again, you know much more about PBIS because you live it, probably breathe it every day. But it is a process. It's a proven process. It's research-based that promotes positive behavior in the schools. And it also has a way for schools commonly to decide how to deal with students who misbehave. A couple of principles of PBIS. And if you are not familiar with PBIS, I can assure you, you will be before too long, because it really is becoming the model for every school district in the state or in the nation. But under PBIS, positive behavior intervention and support, every child, the understanding is just like every child can learn appropriate, proper behaviors. They just have to be told what they are. They have to be reinforced. It is also based on the principle of stepping in early and trying to, as Gomer Pyle used to say, nip it in the bud, but to prevent some of those serious behavior problems before they start. It also recognizes the whole child. It recognizes that children are different. They learn differently. They come from different environments. They have different kinds of support at home or not support. So they do have to have a variety of ways to provide that behavior support. And that behavior support should take in consideration each individual child. It also recognizes that to deal with discipline and to deal with behavior, you need to have a research-based and based on science. It also recognizes that a child's behavioral progress is just as important as their academic progress. Schools use and gather data. You probably have a data sheet about the behavior problems. They use it. It is studied. It's sent to the state. There are programs to honor and recognize schools that have made significant progress with their behavior and decreasing their behavior problems. So it's well researched, documented, and used in the state of North Carolina, and as I'm sure it is in most, if not all, the districts in South Carolina. You know this, PBIS is not a treatment or therapy. It's just a framework. It's basically, here's what we do at blank elementary school. And here's what our teachers do when they deal with the child. Here's what the administrators do. Here is what you can expect from us at this school as we begin to work with children. So it's kind of an expectation, not really a program. And it is also well communicated to parents so that every parent or every child has that understanding. Originally, it started out, I believe, in special education services, and it has certainly become mainstream now. It leads to better student behaviors, and that's for sure. I'd like to say I could definitely prove that there's less bullying, but I really would have a hard time saying that, because I think that is a problem that schools are going to continue to have, whether they have PBIS, whether it's completed with fidelity, but hopefully that's a byproduct of it. As I mentioned, we've had a couple of schools in Caldwell County where I was the superintendent up till June, who went on to really significantly reduce the discipline behaviors. They also have experienced better grades because as students are engaged more, they understand the rules more, they're not punished more, they're not sent home, they're not sent to a center, to breakout center or something, that they tend to have better grades, and that's a proven scientific research. 3 parts to it. There's a 3-part to preventing problem behaviors school-wide. The primary, of course, is the classroom and school-wide strategies. This is really all about promoting that positive culture and positive behaviors are reinforced, and that everybody has some consistency in dealing with behaviors. Now, that may sound like it's a little bit counterproductive to understanding that every child is different, but it's really not. If you have a consistent framework of how we're going to deal with this particular behavior, you also can have taken into consideration everything that that child brings to the table. The second level is prevention, and this is when you begin to identify those students who have at-risk behaviors and need a little bit more intensified primary prevention. And again, these could be special clubs put together by your school counselors, or it could be people who meet monthly with the principal or assistant principal, behavior contracts. All these things are certainly not new to you. The reason why we talk about constructive discipline and we talk about PBIS is because when you become the administrator, you're going to be administering a school that will be using PBIS. And how you approach it and what kind of understanding you have of it or how committed you are to it will certainly make a lot of difference in whether or not that school uses PBIS with fidelity. The third step is really where you have the child who seems to have some serious problems. And so this is where you deal mostly with people who have mental health problems or students who have mental health problems, some really behavioral disorders. These are supports that are certainly going to be tailored to the individual child and to the individual child's basic needs. So that's the three-tier approach. Basically, PBIS works as a school-wide initiative. The focus is on preventing problems. The students learn and have contracts about what's appropriate, what's not, just like they do any other subject. The students are taught social skills, which is something that a lot of schools would tell you is badly needed. And they learn how to get along with each other and how to deal within social situations. They do this through role play. They do through, again, positive reinforcements such as rewards and those kinds of things, because there's a whole network of ways in which you can reward kids. So again, in PBIS, and why it's important to you as a future administrator is that you really want to have your classroom teachers understanding it so that they can take care of the behavior problem consistently in the classroom. And if you haven't, and if your staff really hadn't bought into PBIS or have not been trained appropriately, or they feel that you don't support it, you're going to find that your job is going to be tremendously complicated by more and more students who are making their way to your desk because a spitball is thrown, or the teachers aren't following through on consistency. And remember, when a teacher sends a child to the office, they have now lost control of the problem. They have given it to you to take care of. So PBI is very important that you as a principal mirror and make sure that it is consistently enforced throughout your building, and that it is consistently with fidelity, acted out with fidelity. Again, it's all about strategy. It's all about prevention. And it's all about monitoring the behaviors and making sure that there is an alternative to that behavior. It is really not about punishment. The takeaways from PBIS is that it works. There's a lot of research out there that shows that PBIS is a very substantial progress, made substantial progress in our schools with behavior, grades, and discipline, and that it works for everybody. And it's not just for those in special education. So, how do I get out of this? There's something else I want to show you. Oh, that's me. There's, make sure I can get back to it. But when you go to, I hope I haven't lost it. There is a, oh, here it is. There's a website. This is for North Carolina, but again, if you're in South Carolina, I'm sure that you have it. But there's a whole website at the Department of Public Instruction devoted to PBIS. And from that, you can find out who, of course, your coordinator is. You can have a brief description of what PBIS is. This is the website from the Department of Public Instruction. And it talks about here, you can look at a request for funding. Not exactly sure what that is, but you can talk, it shares with you about the collection of data, professional development, coaching, state recognition programs. If you look further, it talks here again on the forms that are used for PBIS, and understanding that PBIS now addresses a lot of mental health issues. It also has a section on how to deal with the mental health needs of our students. And so I am sure that all of you who work in the public schools also recognize that mental health has become a huge issue for all of our schools, and PBIS is an instrument or tool in which can be used to address that. There's a wiki space for PBIS, so North Carolina has done a great job. South Carolina, I'm sure, as well, has a whole division of the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction that's devoted to working with PBIS. Interesting website and a bunch of resources that you can use to implement with fidelity PBIS. Now, I spent a little bit of time talking about PBIS and why it's important. Anybody out there, what's your experience with PBIS? Anybody want to share? Your experience with PBIS in your school? Does it work? Do you like it? Anybody?
We're not using it at my school, Dr. Stone.
You will be before too long. You'll be an expert on it. You'll be the go-to. Has anybody using it? Jason, do you use it?
Yeah, I was actually doing some research on that, and sadly, no, we don't.
It's coming to you. I think the state's rolling it out, and our big high schools, the high schools are going to be the last ones who get it, is my understanding from the state, but it's coming. So you'll be an expert. All of you already know what PBIS is, and you know how to help your school implement it when it finally gets there. But it's a great resource. And so when it starts coming, Jason or Tawanda, look at the South Carolina page. There'll be some interesting help for you as they roll it out. And you can see the state of North Carolina has devoted its resources by having 7 different people who are actually consultants who serve the 7 parts of our state. So DPI, the Department of Public Instruction in North Carolina, has really given it a lot of leeway and has given it a lot of resources devoted to it because it is the trend and it's definitely where we're going. So PBIS, keep it on your radar. If you're not using it now, you will. Now, any questions on that before I move to my next topic that's covered through our lessons this week? All right, you guys are good. So the last thing I want to talk about is program evaluations, because you covered this in one of our books. Program evaluations, and again, why is it important to you as a future administrator? Well, one of the things when you become when they name you the principal of your high school or your middle school, or your elementary school, now as assistant principal, you will have a chance to work on these. You probably won't have a chance to direct them. But it is important that as you go into the new school that you've been assigned, that you immediately get a feel for what's working, what's not working, because the way things work in public education, or my experience with it has been, that we add stuff and add stuff and add stuff, add programs, add things, because one teacher may like it or the whole school may like it, but over time, there's only one person in the building use it, but yet we've devoted resources and time to it. Now, so as an administrator, your first assignment when you go into that new school, other than establishing yourself and becoming the leader of the school, I think is to make sure that your school is functioning like you want it to. So program evaluations are important. So a little understanding of what program evaluations, that's why it's in your textbook. That's why we want to spend a little time on it. Basically, when you go into a school and you start collecting information about a program, because you're trying to make a decision about that program. I can assure you, when you become a principal and you go to your school and you think you've got this huge budget that you can start working with, you don't. You really don't. And so you're going to have to start making decisions about, do we keep this, particularly if you're coming in and you have this neat idea that you really think is going to drive instruction or is going to make your school stand out from all the others, but it may cost a little bit, or it may have some people or reallocation of people involved with it. You're going to have to make some really quick decisions about where that comes from, because holding your hand out to the central office is not going to get you anything. And you can write grants and grants. That's one way to do it. But you really are going to have to look internally to find out what's not working in your school, collect data about it, and then make the decisions about whether to continue that or to start a new program. Because money is tight, and it always will be tight. And when you become that school principal or assistant principal, you're not going to find a whole bunch of money sitting out there for you to implement some of the things that you particularly like or some of the things that you really saw at the school you were working in that would work so well here. When you were a classroom teacher and you worked in this school, my gosh, this program was great. Or this particular direction you were going in really made a lot of difference. Well, when you go get your first assignment, it's going to take you some time to be able to do that at the new school. And that's why you use program evaluations. Because the worst thing you can do is to go into that school and say, I'm the principal now, and so here's what we're going to do. I'm just going to cut this, and we're going to have this brand new program. If you do that, the staff is not going to buy into it. The staff will only recognize your leadership because of power. So what you're going to have to do, or what you need to do, is to make sure that you are bringing people along and you have your information together. So when you begin to make decisions, it's based on data. It's based on absolute data and what's best. So you got to be prepared for that. So again, program evaluation, 35 different kinds, but it really depends on what you want to learn about the program or what's your future end goal for that particular program. You got to have two things. You got to have an organization, which would be your school. You got to have a program. Let's use as an example Letterland. If you're not familiar with the Letterland, it means you're not an elementary person. Letterland is a program on phonetics. It's a great program in my opinion. We implemented it in Caldwell County, but a lot of money. Costs a lot of money to do that. So you got to have the school, then you got to have the program. It's got to be a specific program that requires resources, people, or money, and there's got to be some outcomes that are attached to that program. The information, so if you do one, it depends on what kind of information you want. And also the thing you need to do is to go in with an open mind. If you're going into your school as the principal and saying, well, I'm getting rid of this program, you really are doing a disservice. And if you're building your whole program evaluation with the idea to get rid of it, you are building it wrong. You're going about it the wrong way, because you ought to be able to take that data that you get back and make an informed decision from that. And sometimes the data may not prove what you want it to prove. And if it doesn't, then you need to let it go. But so with program evaluations, there's a couple of things you ask. What is it you want to do? What kind of information you're going after? What sources are going to be helpful? How can you do it? What's the format you're going to use on it? And when is the information needed? And are you committed to the answer? If it is a goals-based evaluation, that means you are evaluating the goals. There are 8 different kinds of questions you can ask yourself to see about the goals of goal-based evaluation. This is when you are looking at a program to follow whether or not it is meeting the objectives that it has set out for itself. If there's a program, can someone mute?
We can't have bad stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So the next base is a process base, and this is where you evaluate the whole process, or the process in which you arrive at something. Again, there are different kinds of questions. So there are 3 different kinds of evaluations. The first one, of course, was the goal base, where you are evaluating the goals of the organization or the goals of that particular program. The process evaluation looks at the whole process. This is when programs are long-standing, they've changed over the years, and there's a lot of processes that are built into that particular program. Again, different questions that you ask. The third one, which is the one that businesses use a lot, and that's an outcome-based evaluation. And in this one, you are looking at the outcomes. You're looking to see whether or not the programs are producing the kinds of outcomes that you will want to use and you want to know in your school. Now, for most of you, let me go back. For most of you, it's going to be an outcome-based evaluation when you go into your school. You're going to want to check to make sure, and when you start talking about programs, you want to make sure that those programs are delivering on the outcomes that you have. Because when you're in a school, your outcomes are in the paper when the state reports how well your school is doing. So outcome-based evaluation, very important. That's the one that you're probably going to use the most. There are different kinds of questions that you ask about whether or not it's getting the kinds of goals that you want. Neat little chart showing you the methods to do your evaluation, or to do your program evaluation, the method, the purpose, the advantages, the challenges, and you see here, and when you start working on your dissertation at Gardner-Webb, when you going for your advanced degree and you become a doctor of education from Gardner-Webb, of course. When you start doing your research into your dissertation, these are the kinds of quantitative data that you will be collecting. Questionnaires, interviews, documentation, observation, focus groups, case studies. And from there you can see, this is a really neat little chart that I encourage you to, and I'll save it for you because this is what you're going to use when you start working on your dissertation or any other kind of major research papers that you do. Because you're going to have to do some research and it's going to be based on one of these kinds of methods to do a program evaluation. Or, neat little chart. There is also, when you start working on your dissertation or you start doing research, there are some ethics that you must be aware of, and that is, and if you do work through Gardner-Webb, we will explain this in great detail to you, but the people who are included in your evaluation, they must, you certainly can't share any personal information. Your database has got to be large enough so it can't be easy for me to know, oh, that was the person that you were talking about. And you have to make sure people understand and sign off that they clearly understand that they are a part of your survey or a part of this program evaluation and that they have a right to participate. So really, it's really informed consent. That's the ethics part of it. Once you've done that, then you begin to look at what method you want to use. Go back to that chart I gave you. And what is, again, the purpose of what you want to collect the data for will drive what kind of methods you use to collect the data. And sometimes it's going to be a combination of them. But again, the important thing to remember is whatever you decide that you're doing in that school to collect the data, some of it is mandated by the state. You can put your hands on, EVOS, those kinds of things you can put your hands on very easily. But if you're going out and you're doing surveys and interviews of your staff, make sure that your staff have signed or understand the ethics of the decision and that they have some ethical, you have an ethical obligation to let them know what you're doing. Once you get it, there's a way to look at it, to analyze and to interpret that information and how you want to use it. The next step, of course, would be how to report those evaluation results, because even though you are the principal and you have the power to make decisions, you would certainly want to report out to the staff, here's what I discovered, here's what we need to do differently, what's your opinion on it, your school improvement team should be brought in on this, and other programs. And if you're going for grants, your funders are certainly going to require documentation. Who should carry out the evaluation? Ideally, it would be you as the administrator or the principal, as well as members of your school improvement team. Because if you are the only one doing it, then obviously it looks like you're trying to own the data, that you're trying to manipulate the data. Again, you're going to give excuses for people to say, oh, the principal just wanted us to do that, so he or she manipulated the data. And of course, there are some certain pitfalls to program evaluations, and probably the most important one is that if you ask people for their opinion, then you should certainly use part of it or let them know why you're not using it. So the worst thing you can do with the program evaluation, even if it comes back and you are totally wrong, this program is working wonders at your school, and this new program that you want to bring in would not get those kinds of results, you owe it to your staff to let them know, hey, here's the survey, here's kind of what we discovered. I was wrong. It's working well here, so we're going to continue doing it. So you kind of at the end of it, you got to share with it and the outcomes, not only of it, but why it's driving your decision. So again, be cautious. It's not always going to come back the way you think it's going to come back. It's not always going to come back to prove exactly what you wanted to prove. And when it doesn't, you've got to recognize the power of the school improvement team to help you make decisions regarding the next steps in those programs. So tonight we've talked about constructive discipline. We talked about the need for that with students, but also the need when you become the principal or the assistant principal, the need for you to be aware of constructive discipline versus punishment, and your role as an administrator. You're going to run into students and staff who need to be disciplined. There's a model for it. We've also talked about, as well as the PBIS model, and we've talked about some of your first steps once you become that principal, and that is, what do you do as you begin to evaluate your new school and you begin to evaluate programs. All right, that said, do we have any questions? No one. All right. Well, I want to go out of here. All right. Any questions? I'm going to stop sharing. Should bring me back up to my screen. All right. You all have a great evening, and we'll see you back next week. Good night.
Dr. Stone.
Anybody want to stick around to talk or anything? Feel free. But if not, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Like,
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.